Hi, Shalom and Shavua Tov. Welcome to this shir on Parshas Vayishlach. Now, Vayishlach brings us to the climax of Yaakov meeting Eisov. After all these years, after he ran away from Haran and then spent these 20 plus years by Lavan's house and the 14 years in Shem ve'ever. And behind this, there's always behind the scenes, there's this unresolved scene and unresolved issues with Esav. And then Yaakov now comes and has to meet him. And there's this large climax about this in this parsha. But there's a sub-story, a secondary story happening, which is what I want to focus on in this shir tonight. And that's the story of Dina. Because Rashi says something quite fascinating on the pasuk where Yaakov takes his family over the river and doesn't mention him bringing Dina. Rashi says that because Yaakov hid her, so Esav wouldn't see her, and because Yaakov held Leah back from being able to turn Esav around, to rectify him, to bring him back into a well-balanced and holy person, to this good, because Yaakov didn't allow that to happen with Dina, Dina ends up falling into the whole scenario with Shechem, where she sort of gets wooed by this man and becomes a very unpleasant scenario where she's being taken advantage of and then rescued by Shimon and Levi. So to try to understand, first of all, what's the relationship between that? Why? Because Yaakov stopped her from being able to connect to Esav, is she punished with Shechem? How do we understand that? That's what we're going to look at. And there are other few layers that are interesting that we want to look at as well, because it's also brought, and we'll see these sources inside in a moment, that Yosef blocks Esav from seeing his mother Rachel. But in this case, instead of being punished, Yosef is praised, and he says, because he blocked Esav from staring at his mother Rachel, then he was blessed that the girls of Egypt stared at him and stared at his beauty. So why in that scene does it work and sort of it's praised, but when it comes with Dina, is it not? Another layer that we want to look at is this interplay between Dina and her mother Leah. Because we know that Leah also somehow had a destiny with Esav that she never met. And we know that Dina is very connected to Leah because she's described in the verse as the daughter of Leah went out. And we're going to get into these in a moment, but just to give you the overview, we want to understand what's the relationship between Dina and Leah and how it's playing out in this story, and why it end up being punished in this way with Shechem, and why by Yosef is it okay. So to do that, let's jump in and look at some of the verses. So in Pasuk Chav Gimel, Perek Lamed Bet, it says, Vayakom balayla hu vayikach eshtei nashav eshtei sefchotav vet asar yaladav. So Yaakov got up in the night and he took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 children. And Rashi says, where was Dina? And he says, Nasna beteva v'nal bifanea. He put her in a box and closed it. Shel yitin ba'esav enav. So Esav shouldn't put his eyes on her. Ulakach nenesh Yaakov. And because of this, Yaakov was punished. Shenimna me'achiv. That he held her back from his brother. Shematach zirenu lemutav. Because maybe she could have brought him back to good. V'nafla b'yad Shechem. And then she ended up falling into Shechem. So that's quite a intense statement here, that because Yaakov didn't let Dina meet Esav and connect him or marry him, he ended up being punished. But if we just look, as I said in Pasuk Zayin of Perek Lamed Gimel, Rashi says on the words Nigash Yosef v'Rachel, that Yosef went first before Rachel, says B'kula nemos nagshu lefnei abanim. By the other wives, they went before the children, but here Yosef goes before her. because he said, my mother is beautiful, and maybe this Rasha would put his eyes on her. So therefore, he stood in front of her so he couldn't see her, and therefore he merited to leberkas ale ayin. Okay, so in order to start to understand this, we have to understand what Eisov represents. So as we understand this, we're going to draw from classic, just looking at the Pshat. We're also going to draw from Chassidus and classic Kabbalah of what Eisov represents. And we're also going to be using psychology and classic psychodynamic understanding of human process. And I'll be sharing my insight or my chidush through that lens of psychology and how it's weaving together with the Chassidut. And I hope we can step away from that with a deeper understanding of the Parsha and also a deeper understanding of serving Hashem in the right way and in wholeness and in full power. Okay, so as we said, to start, we have to understand, what does Eisov represent? So this is a very classic question, and the classic Hasidic and Kabbalistic answer is that Eisov isn't something bad per se, but he's a powerful energy. And in Eisov himself, it was an energy that he wasn't able to harness in the right way, but it's definitely not intrinsically bad. And on the contrary, it is something very good, something very powerful, even more powerful than Yaakov. And that's why Yitzchak loved Esav and wanted to bless him. But Esav wasn't able to harness it or use it in the right way. And Yaakov's whole journey with Esav is seeing how can he interface with Esav and be able to, in a way, become a little bit more like Esav. What do we mean by that? We mean, and again, this is all very classic, famous explanation, that Yaakov was ish tam ish ohalim. Yaakov was in the tent, in a way more spiritually drawn, more of a spiritual inclination. But we know that to serve Hashem with our full capacity, with all of who we are, we have to be in touch with all our powers. And some of those powers are more erotic, or more alive, or more powerful, or more wild than those archetypal Yaakov energies. They're more Esav energies, as he says he was a man of the field, and he would trap. So that is very good, because when a person can access such energy, such aliveness, such zest for life and power or bravado, these things we can use to make ourselves bigger, more expanded, more powerful, and then our soul can reach further and connect to Hashem further. So that's necessary. You can't just have the meek Yaakov, that a person who just wants to shut off those other parts of him or not develop those parts of him will end up really regretting it. So that's why you see Yaakov is hesitant to do it, but he's always, when he's coming out of the womb, right, he's holding Esav's ankle, because he knows he has to chase after him and get something from him. And then he gets the firstborn from Esav, then he gets the Bechorot, and etc. and etc. But the whole time it's obviously wary of it, because as we know, these more physical ways of being in the world can make someone forget about Hashem. A person can't always integrate it. So now they're just even more alive and even more powerful and can feel Hashem in an even greater way. So he's hesitant. But what we realize, though, by the time Yaakov, now all these years later, meets Esav, he's come much further. He's come much further to appreciate what Esav is. And therefore he actually bows down to Esav 7 times, sort of realizing that as a Jew, we will never be able to serve Hashem well if we block out parts of ourselves that at first don't feel holy. If it's parts that are, as I said, more wild or more alive or seem more corporal or more erotic. If we cut those parts out, we'll never be able to serve Hashem fully well. So by the time Yaakov meets Esav, he's come to appreciate that. and specifically after he fights with Esav's angel, he tells the angel, bless me, meaning saying, I want to get what you have. Okay? The thing is, Yaakov is still a little bit wary. Even though we know that Esav, there's a power there, there's a healing that can happen by tapping into that energy, a rectification for Yaakov himself, for him to be more balanced, he's still a little wary. And this is where it comes with Dina. So he feels at this point, because he's still hesitant, and we'll get to why in a minute, he feels for his daughter, he wants to protect her from that. But the point that I want to say, and again, my thoughts on this, is that this ends up backfiring. Because Dina, in her journey, and we're going to get to why, what was the psychological underpinnings of why she needed this in her journey. So just bear with, we'll get to it all. But for Dina in her journey, she knew she was charismatic. She knew she can affect good and turn men around. She knew that she can get out in the world and help people, men or women, become aware of Hashem. There's a part of her that yearned to go out into that gray zone, into that place. Like the way I want you to think about it, it's like maybe going out to a club or something. It's not necessarily fully kosher, but it's not necessarily not kosher. And Dina knew she can go there and somehow take that energy of that place, somehow take that energy of the club, and now just feel more alive, more inspired to live, more inspired to make change in the world, feeling somehow more fed as a human being. She knew she could go to those gray areas and turn it around. But not only did she know she could, she needed to. For Dina to, and again, I said, we'll get to why in a minute. Dina knew that she couldn't play it safe. Dina knew she was suffocated by playing it safe, and being able to meet Esav would have been the balance for her. But what happened was, because Yaakov held her back from that, she still had that need inside of her. She still knew that for her to reach balance, she still had this fire saying, I'm unfulfilled. I need to tap into something that's like gray and has this energy that's less black and white, that's less just like the shtetl. She needed to tap into an Esav type of experience. So because she was held back from being able to do that, that need was still there. And whenever we need to do a tikkun, meaning we need to tap into some energy from the world, some Esav energy, maybe we need to go do wrestling or play in a rock and roll band or go to a music festival or whatever it is. And when we don't listen in the right time, and it's not always, we're going to get also in a minute to say when is it right and when is it wrong. But let's just assume for this person it's right for them. When we don't do it and we suppress that, the need actually ends up becoming stronger. And then we end up needing to fulfill it anyways, but now in a much less balanced and much more desperate way. So then Dina ends up going out. She still has this desire. She needs to go out because it's what she needs for her well-being. So she goes out, but now it's already been suppressed. It's already been held back. So when Shechem comes about, as I said, she's not thinking as clearly, and she's thinking more like to compensate. Because she was held back from Esav, now she's pushing back even stronger, and then ends up in a mess that really is quite unfortunate, where she ends up being taken advantage of by Shechem. So again, so what we're starting to answer here and what's going on in this story is it's not so much that because Yaakov held Leah, Dina, back from Esav, he was punished with Shechem, and it's like a totally separate punishment. But it's actually, one was just caused the next. One was a natural psychological result of the next. That because Dina knew she needed to do something with a more Esav energy, as we said before, that archetypally Esav represented the field, and that wildness, that aliveness, that zest, and that that can be more of a gray zone. It's not inherently holy, but it has a power to it. So because she was held back from that and she needed that, then she ended up needing to get it and find a way to get it, but in a much less healthy way. Like, let's go again. Let's say you have a teenager who wants to go listen to rock music at a venue or a club. So that's something, as we're saying, which can be gray. And again, we'll get into it. But for them, that might help them feel more alive. It might help them individuate. It might help them feel more like them, that they're being themselves and living their own life and not just following orders. And then they can take that independence, they can take that aliveness, and then channel it to become the best person they can be to serve God the best way. But let's say that's suppressed, that desire for individuation, or go listen to that music, or that Eisov experience is suppressed, then that need will always be there. And it'll just fester till they maybe do something much more extreme. Maybe they take some unhealthy amount of drugs to say, I can do what I want to do. But if we would have been able to honor that first impulse of what they needed, then it wouldn't have become as messy later on as what happens with Dina, where she goes out and ends up with Shechem because she was knowing she needed to access something like that. Okay, let's now, as we described that first psychological process, that when we suppressed what Dina needed, she ended up still needing to do it, but in a, so to speak, a less balanced and more extreme way. Let's try to understand, why did Dina have this need to begin with? Excuse me. And this is where we get to another psychological idea. And so from my lens, what I see, the reason why Dina had this so strong is for two reasons. Number one, we know that Leah, first of all, had this charisma and outgoing nature to begin with. And that's why she actually could have been matched with Eisov. And that's why when Dina later on goes out to Shechem, it says, Vatetze Dina bas Leah, asher yeldel Yaakov. It really, and Dina went out, the daughter of Leah, saying that this link, this going out, this need to be out there was very intrinsic to both Leah and Dina. But here, now listen carefully, listen what happens. Leah had this destiny that she could go out. But in a way, it seems to me that Leah avoided that. She was so frightened by that thought that she will have to go out of her comfort zone, that she'll have to engage in this type of gray zone of needing to face Eisov. And that's why the famous pasuk says, Ve'enei Leah rakot. In pasuk Yud Zayin, Perek 29, it says the eyes of Leah were tender. And Rashi explains because she thought she would have to marry Eisov. So she was in such turmoil by that. She was so thrown off by that. She was constantly crying because she thought she had to marry Eisov. So Leah had this potential challenge or hurdle to overcome to be able to step into Eisav's life, to step into this kind of world, these type of experiences that have such power but in a way don't seem holy and seem scary. How can I grab them by the horns and not sort of be lost in them, but somehow use them just to build ourselves up, to praise Hashem further, to serve Hashem further? So what she did is, you could say, she took the safer route, which was becoming Yaakov's wife. But what we know, though, that she was always felt, though, she never had a sense of peace, because she always felt now like the imposter, like she pushed her way in. Because Leah knew that she wasn't as loved as Rachel. And even now, I want to quote from here, even now, so many years later, after over 20 years of marriage, when they're meeting Eisov, it says in the pasuk that Yaakov put first the maidservants, then Leah, and then Rachel. And Rashi says in pasuk Beis, Ha'achron achron chaviv, the most in behind were the most cherished. So even in those moments, right up to 20 years later, Leah, in a way, is still seeing that Rachel is the main wife. And as we know, she names all her children, saying, maybe now my husband will appreciate me, maybe now my husband will cleave to me, maybe now my husband will love me. So Dina grew up seeing her mother carrying this pain of feeling like she imposed on Yaakov. But Dina, we can say, saw deeper. She saw Leah suffering, and she understood that it was because perhaps Leah never stepped into her potential of marrying Esav. Because Leah avoided it. Because Leah avoided this potential, she ended up suffering, feeling like a third wheel. And always, as we said, all the psukim, when even Rachel comes and asks for the flowers that Reuven picked, she says, you took my husband, now you want to take these flowers, these dudaim. So she's carrying throughout the story, when she's naming her children, when it comes to the flowers with Reuven, or when it comes to right here meeting Esav, where Rachel is clearly given clearly shown the preference. She's carrying this pain of feeling like, I never really, my life I never really clicked. I sort of avoided my destiny. So Dina sees that pain. She sees the suffering that Leah has because she didn't step in this gray zone. And Dina almost is watching that, is almost traumatized by that, and makes a commitment to herself that I will not end up that way. I will not be complacent. I will jump into that fire. I will jump into these gray zones, into these things of life that at first maybe don't seem holy, but I know I might need that, but a person might need that for the rectification to feel less stuck. Like it says, if that comes to me, I will take it. I need to take it. So now we understand more deeply why it says, and Dina went out the daughter of Leah. Because when Dina goes out to Shechem, she's fighting against saying, I cannot end up like my mother. This is a very classic psychological process, that if someone's parent is, let's say, very immature and never spends time with the children, the child, to heal themselves, says, when I become a parent, I will not be that way. Or if a parent is in one extreme way and hurts their child in that way, the child psychologically, the way they defend themselves from that pain is by committing and protecting themselves by saying, I will protect you from ever needing to face that. So this constant tension in the Yaakov household of Leah sort of being there but not being fully accepted, Dina's always witnessed that. And she makes this commitment to herself that I'm ready to do whatever it takes not to end up in that thing. And she has this need. So when Yaakov holds her back from Esav, it just intensifies that trauma that I'll end up like my mother. And I'll end up being stuck, not ever living my potential, not ever facing these fears that I need to, and not ever becoming the best I can be, not ever stepping into these gray zones. So now she's even more motivated to fight back, to make sure she doesn't end up that way. So therefore, she goes out and is open to be wooed by Shechem. So we're seeing how these different lines of the story are woven together, that Dina's really trying her best to avoid the fate of Leah. And that's why she could have been primed to make a difference for Esav. And I want to talk about that for a moment. Why was she specifically could have and Yaakov couldn't? So it's another idea that when we can approach someone objectively, we can always see their potential. We're less stuck in the story of who they are and their shortcomings, and we're able to see the bigger picture. It's like we're able to zoom out and see their pain and maybe see their struggles and see where they can actually what they can actually become. So Yaakov, when he's meeting Esav, he's actually affected by fear and anger. Rashi in Pasuk 22 of Perek 32 says he was frustrated and angry that he had to do all this work just to appease his brothers, sending him all these gifts and all these angels and prepare for war. And he was deeply scared of what might need to happen. So in that moment of fear and anger, Yaakov wasn't able to be objective to see about how Esav can turn around. But Dina, if you look at the Hebrew root of that word of Dina is din. Din can be sternness, but it could also just mean judgment. And when we judge something, we have to do it from an objective place, from a place of equanimity, where we're just looking at the facts. And just on the facts, it seems like Eisov could have been turned around, particularly with the history that Dina was coming from, that she didn't want to end up like her mother and was really committed to jump into something, that maybe would raise some eyebrows and say, how could you marry that guy? But she was ready to do it. And because, again, she had this koach also, besides for her history with her mother, this koach of objectivity, of being able to look at the situation and see it for its potential, to be able to zoom out just from a place of din. Like, what is this? Can this be healed? But Yaakov, because of all his struggles with Esav, wasn't able to see that. Now, before we address the part of Yosef, which is a beautiful thing, why he stopped his mother, I just want to stress again what we're saying here. And I think this is very important. That in Torah, we would like to believe that what's holy is good and everything else we should avoid. But we see from these stories that that's not true. And again, all in our lives, sometimes because of whatever challenges we went through, sometimes we need to tap into Esav energy. As I said, that could be going to just a kickboxing class. That could be a dance class. That could be a rock and roll festival. That could be many things. But we have to listen to our being, what it needs to feel whole. Because there's lights from this world of Esav that isn't in the tent of the holiness. What do we mean by there's lights in there? It means that when we access it, we feel somehow less suppressed. We feel we're moving into our best version of ourselves. And there are elements from the world, from the physical world, from the erotic world, which if we can tap into, we become the best version of ourselves. And despite our best desires not to fall into Tumah, if we're too afraid to do that, you have to hear the warning here of Dina, you'll end up in a story like Shechem. It could be that you could have gone, accessed it and elevated like Dina with Esav, but if you're too cautious, then you can end up with a much worse scenario where that frustration is still there, and now you're just a more limited person. It's like you're trying to serve God, but you only have 3 wheels. And there's power and energy from the world and aliveness that could have been accessed, that it's a shame that it was missed. Okay, so let's now go into the layer of Yosef. And why did Yosef block Esav from seeing his mother? And this is where it gets really interesting. And that is because when we're talking about this gray thing like Esav, which isn't bad, as we're saying, but it's not necessarily good either, then it moves into a world of subjectivity. That to one person, this can be holy, and to another person, it cannot. And actually to the same person, at one period in your life, this can be holy, and another period, it will not be. Because and people who, when we have more limited thinking, we say, well, tell me, is this good or is this bad? And the answer is, the real truth is that it depends. As we know in Kabbalah, you have sfirot that are opposite each other, like chesed and gevura, but one that can combine both, that's a mixture, it's not either extreme, is the most evolved, it's the center one. So this story of should you go to a rock and roll concert? For one person, that would not be helpful. It will not be what they need. It will not bring them to more wholeness. But to another person, that's exactly what they needed. And it's actually going against your service of Hashem if you don't do it. And that's why if you look at the languaging in Rashi, when it comes to Dina, the way Esav is described is as the brother of Yaakov. He says Yaakov was punished because he prevented his brother from meeting Dina. But when we go to Yosef, when we look at Yosef, it says, he said, my mother is beautiful, and maybe this Rasha, he's termed here as the wicked one, will put her eyes on her. So why suddenly is this the case? Because the answer is it's subjective. It depends who or in which journey they are will affect what this thing is. Now, people like to gravitate to concrete answers because you don't have to take personal responsibility to say, is this good or is this not good? You say, you just tell me. But the depth of the Torah is saying here that it depends. For Dina, it was holy, but for Rachel, it was unneeded. And from that perspective, Esav was a Rasha. And that's why there's a beautiful Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu, who gave down the entire Torah, said he would stutter. And in Hebrew, to stutter is ligamgem. And if you think about it, those words is gam v'gam. This and that. That means to stutter is you're not saying one thing black and white. You're saying everything could be both, depending on the situation. So again, ligamgem means to stutter, and it means gam v'gam. Also and also. So is Esav bad? Well, it depends. For Dina's journey, seeing her mother struggle and somehow not access the world of Esav, this erotic world, and staying in a safer world, for her it was needed. That would have rectified her and rectified Esav. For Rachel, it wouldn't be holy. So as I said, is a rock concert holy? It depends for who and what they need, depending on their developmental history and depending on what's the motivation. So there's a lot of beautiful lessons in that. That basically wraps up what I wanted to touch on. So again, to review that all these little stories and these details are connected. That Esav had this neutral potential, as we said. That's why Yaakov is drawn to him and bows down to him and asks his angel to bless him. But Yaakov, because he's not objective, because he's still caught in his anger and hurt by Esav, cannot see what can happen with Dina. So he holds Dina back, but Dina needs that. Because she has the energy of Leah, she's an outgoing person like Leah. But she needed she knew she needed to not fall into the destiny that Leah picked. So when Yaakov holds her back, she's now forced to do that, but in a less wholesome way. So us ourselves as well, if there's parts of us that are calling, that feel we need this to be more alive, we need this to be happier, we need this to heal something in our life, we should be much more open to seeing if there's a way we can access that and rectify it. Because otherwise, as I said, that ends up festering inside, and then we end up usually accessing it anyways, but in a way that doesn't lead to rectification, doesn't actually help us be more balanced, and just maybe throws us off more. And then ultimately what we want to understand is, well, how do I know? The answer is you have to come back to personal responsibility of really feeling in your own journey, going with Hashem, of what will something from the world of Esav that you can access and what is not. And for Rachel, that was not needed. So Esav was described there as the Rasha, as opposed to Dina, where he's described as the brother. And we see this, we know in Halacha and in Gemara, there's always differences of opinion and trying to access the nuance of both angles. And actually the core of Hashem, we know in the deepest Chassidus, Hashem is both, meaning He's limited and unlimited. Hashem is the ultimate way to be able to be in paradoxes, because that's the awesomeness of Hashem. And if we can allow ourselves to step into places like that, to see Esav and not recoil, because Yaakov shut down by the Esav, and it took a lot of pushing for him to open up a little, but he didn't open up enough. We can appreciate the paradoxes, that we have to access some paradoxes. We have to access things from life that may not be black or white, but that will help us. We have to be open to that. Otherwise, we will suffer. And we have to trust our being and our wisdom of seeing, is this something that I should access to help me get closer to Hashem, or is it not? I hope this comes together well, and we can use these ideas to get closer to Hashem, because ultimately, we know the only way we'll bring Mashiach is if we take the light of Esav into the rectification of Yaakov. Those are the words of Kabbalah. The Oret HaTohu into the Kalim of tikkun. The light of Esav, this light of that you get where you're somehow more powerful, you feel like you're less suppressed, you feel like you're more accessing all of who you are when you step into the world of Esav, which whatever it might be, which is this less meek, just one trying to serve God in the Yaakov lane. We know to bring Mashiach, we need to access all the energies of the world, all the parts of our being. As I said, if it's somehow singing or dancing or sport or anything on any plane, when we can access that and then turn it up to Hashem and use it not for our ego, but just to be more whole, to praise Hashem more deeply, then we're able to bring Mashiach. And if we avoid that and we go the safer way, we say, well, I'll just stay in the Beit Midrash, and part of me feels broken and part of me feels like a loser, but I'm not going to address that. I'm just going to stay the frum way. And then when you're too frum, you end up creating, meaning, what do I mean too frum? Meaning you're not accessing the lights of Esav enough, then you end up with the issues of Dina, which didn't work out well. So I bless us all to be able to go on this path, even at times it may not be black or white, but to be able to legamgem, to be in both, to the paradox, which is what Hashem is, as well as I said, the ultimate one who is beyond physical or spiritual. That's why this is the work of Mashiach, because Hashem is everything. We have to experience that Hashem is everything. Hashem is the field, Hashem is the music, Hashem is the eros, and Hashem is the Gemara, and Hashem is the Tefillin. And when we can bring it all to who we are in our service of Hashem, then we actually reveal Hashem's presence everywhere. But we have to have the courage to do that. And as we said, Leah perhaps held back from that, and Yaakov held back from that, and Dina paid the price. So let us take this deep lesson and step into our wholeness and access Hashem in all elements of the world, wherever we're being called, to break the paradox that really Hashem is everywhere and bring Mashiach.